All right. We are live to the whole of the internet and also to this gathered community. And I'm appreciating this because despite the fact that we're live and recorded, I think that this gives us the opportunity for a little bit more of an intimate and honest conversation. And so if you are tuning in, my name is Reverend Jasper Peters. I use he, him pronouns, and this is Belong Church, and we are exploring a partnership with Safehouse Denver. And so I'm really grateful to be joined by Simone Williams and Jen Caruso from Safehouse Denver as we have a conversation about what does it mean to help. In some ways, the way this conversation came, or at least my very, very personal impetus and curiosity that I'll share is, as someone who has experienced domestic violence, one of the most difficult things was not knowing and not being able to admit that I was in the situation in order to then ask for the help that I needed. And so, seeing your nods and knowing that oh, that wasn't just me and I'm not the only one, I'm grateful to welcome you, and I'll invite y'all to come and sit and just help us to have a conversation about what you do at Safehouse Denver and how we might think about being helpers in this space. Simone, thank you very much. So we'll call on Jen from the audience a little later. Wonderful. Well, Simone.
Awesome. My name is Simone Williams. I use the pronoun she, her, hers, and I've been with Safe House for almost 8 years. I'm the Chief Program Officer, just became the Chief Program Officer in February, and it's been a phenomenal journey. Just my passion and why I ended up at Safe House Denver. I was an intern, went to college up in Greeley, and worked at the domestic violence shelter up there, and then just feel really close to the mission and domestic violence as a whole because of growing up in a home where domestic violence occurred. And so for me, I tried the whole, I wanted to be a teacher because I really want to just have an impact on people and be connected to people, and got to a point where I was like, well, I can't live in Colorado and on a teacher's salary. So decided to switch over to criminal justice, and then really planted my feet within victim services through my internship. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
How do most people encounter Safehouse Denver, maybe I'll say for the first time, or begin to have a relationship with your organization?
Yeah, so the best way to access our services is through our crisis line. That's our main point of entry, and that's the way that you can access both our residential and our non-residential services.
Say more about those.
Yes.
Yeah. Or I guess I'm trying to imagine, without trying to make a caricature of someone, especially not in a difficult situation.
Sure.
But I'm trying to imagine someone who is the person who needs to know that you exist, or needs to know that there is a crisis line, or needs to have the tools to understand that they might need help and there might be help
Yes.
out there, I guess.
Yeah.
So tell me about the folks that you meet, I guess.
Yeah. So we see a lot of different survivors, and the way that they access our services or the way they learn about our services is different. And so one of the probably more predominant narrative oftentimes is that a friend or a family member reached out, and we hear a lot of pastors, a lot of church members like, hey, I don't quite know what's going on for this family. I don't know how to explain it, but something just doesn't feel right. And so oftentimes it's family members or friends reaching out first to say, hey, I just Googled you. And we're thankfully one of the top domestic violence shelter or agencies that shows up on the Google search when you Google DV or domestic violence in Colorado. And so that's the first connection, is typically family or friends. And then we also have people who may have, like, we are out in the community, and so we plan to go to Pride, and we table at events, and so people maybe see our logo, or they're like, hey, I just need to talk to someone, and that's oftentimes, 1 o'clock in the morning, people will call, and this is the only time my kids are asleep, the person who's harming me is gone, or they're at work, and I just need to talk to someone, and I don't know if I'm in a domestic violence relationship, I just don't know how to name this, or I don't know how to talk about it, but I just need someone who's safe, who can just validate what I'm going through. And so it oftentimes that conversation starts with validation to let people know, hey, you're not alone in this. And we see your hurt. And it doesn't matter whether you're someone who identifies as male or female or even youth. We serve all survivors of domestic violence. And that's something that is not necessarily unique to Safehouse Denver, but something that we pride ourselves in is the continued professional development to make sure that we are providing services that are trauma-informed, not only for the different traumas that and hurts that people come from, whether it's physical abuse or emotional abuse, or I know a lot of times within domestic violence relationships where there's children present, that's one of the tactics that abusers can use to try and manipulate situations. But just to have someone, whether it's their family member or friend, call the crisis line and say, I don't quite know how to name this or what this is. Can you help me? And for advocates to then say, hey, you're not alone in this. And what you're describing sounds a lot like domestic violence. Would you be open to some resources? And then that's when we talk about our residential services where survivors can come in and stay within our emergency shelter where they receive an advocate, and that advocate works with them for their entire stay to...
So can I time?
Yeah, yeah.
That scenario in particular.
Yes.
If I'm understanding you well, that is, I'm a person who says, I know that I'm in danger, or
Yeah.
I know that something needs to change, and I have nowhere.
Yes.
I don't have a reliable connection or relationship to lean on. I don't feel comfortable asking for whatever
Yes.
the stuff is. I know that I need something, but I don't have anyone to ask.
Yes.
They can call you,
Yes.
and you can help them have a place to be
Yes.
if they don't have something. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and then some other scenarios that come up at times where people might go to the doctor's office and the doctor's like, nah, what you're describing sounds a lot like domestic violence. Give these people a call. And so sometimes people call and say, I don't know why I'm calling. And so our role then in that space is to say, can you maybe describe what's going on at home, or can you tell me what maybe led your friend to give you our phone number or encourage you to reach out to us?
So I'm maybe jumping
Mm-hmm.
a little bit, but what you make me think of is the person who sees a friend who has a need, or the person who calls themselves and says, I'm calling, but I don't quite know why.
Yes.
why I'm calling. That curiosity that you're describing, it sounds like something that, yes, a professional can do, but I can also imagine how many times as a pastor I've been in
Absolutely.
situations like that, but also you can just be a regular person.
Absolutely.
Someone you
Absolutely.
love say, I'm having a hard time.
Yes.
So can you tell me more about that curiosity that can maybe make room for someone?
Yeah. Yeah. I think oftentimes when people see a friend who's struggling, or even I know sometimes we end up having parents call because like, yeah, my kid shared with their teacher that my partner is abusive or they're mean to me oftentimes. And so having just those conversations around like, hey, what are you noticing that just doesn't quite feel right? Because I think oftentimes we're taught to not listen to our emotions or not listen to things that are coming up for us internally and to question it. But what I often encourage people to do is rather than questioning it, leaning into what is this and why does it sit awkwardly or just it doesn't have a place in my sphere. Yeah.
Do you ever find yourself, I'm imagining you in the place of a crisis line.
Mm-hmm.
I recognize
Yes.
that is not your specific role. Do you ever find yourself having to give people new language to
Yes.
help describe what's going on? So what is that like, or how do you help people?
Yeah. Yeah, so oftentimes, and then ethically as a social worker, as an advocate, we're taught to mimic the language that the other person is using. And so if they are maybe not identifying that the relationship is abusive, we can then pivot our language and say, it sounds like when this person does this, it doesn't make you feel safe. or it makes you sad when this person says this or does this specific thing. And then as we have conversations with that person, we can then introduce language to say, hey, we've talked about this before. Would you be open to me introducing specific language to help you navigate and cope through and maybe take steps towards healing?
Are there any like pieces of language that are often helpful for folks when they sort of learn like, oh yeah, that describes that's the thing?
Yeah. We often use what's called the power and control wheel, just to like, hey, I have a tool. I'd like to introduce this to you. If it's something that resonates with you, take it. We'll have a conversation. If not, if you're not ready for that conversation, we can table it for another time. And so we use that tool to specifically talk about here's how domestic violence might show up in all these different ways. Can you maybe share with me what resonates with you first? And that's oftentimes one of the hardest conversations for survivors to have, especially if they haven't made the connection on their own to say, yes, I'm in an abusive relationship. Because that, and for lots of different reasons, just the realization that someone has exerted power and control over you is not a fun or a great feeling to realize that. And so to get to the point where you're like, wow, this is something that's real and this is something that is true for me in my journey, for someone to come to that realization oftentimes, sometimes people leave after that because it's too much to sit with and have within their immediate consciousness. And so oftentimes it's, hey, if I ask you this question, please don't feel like I'm pushing you. You don't have to answer. You're welcome to share as much or as little as you'd like to share. And we then take the lead of that survivor in that moment.
So it sounds like fear can pop up and can be this barrier.
Absolutely.
With the folks you've spoken to, I have to assume the people overcome that, they process through it. Talk about the fear that folks have. What is it that they are afraid of?
Yeah.
That might be a barrier.
Yeah, it again, it varies depending on the person. I know within, especially minority communities, oftentimes the fear is weakness, especially if there's a undertone of here's the expectation of men within this community or women within this community, here's how you need to show up, and if anyone treats you differently, here's how you respond. But then to be a survivor within that space and not necessarily aligned with the narratives within that community, that's something that can be so just embarrassing or shameful for people. And so that fear oftentimes comes from my community is not going to accept me or not going to be supportive, or if I come out and share this with people, they're going to shun me or they're going to assume that I'm less than because I allowed this experience to happen.
Right. So in some ways what I hear is a preservation of self-image
Mm-hmm.
or a preservation of your place in community,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even a preservation of certain relationships in particular.
Absolutely.
I guess I wonder, do you sometimes see people who are afraid of either, hey, well, this will mean my partner is now going to experience these consequences,
Mm-hmm.
or my partner will be dehumanized, right? So either I'll be
Yes.
dehumanized as a victim, they'll be dehumanized as a victim, as my kids. Do you see that?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So oftentimes, actually there's legislation there because oftentimes survivors like, I know that by me telling or telling my truth or speaking my story, that not only will I potentially experience fear or shame or blame around the experience, but the person who caused the harm, there's consequences for them as well. And so depending on, there's sometimes where there are people who are abusive who are in law enforcement or are teachers or are clergy or are within positions of authority, that because of the violence that they cause on others, they lose their jobs or they lose the ability to perform their jobs. And so there's that fear too. And like living, I mean, Colorado, we all know the housing market and just the lack of resources that there are. And to have the real reality that if I share this story and if I make this real, I could lose my housing, I could lose my children, I could lose my community. And so oftentimes there's that fear too, where it's like, if I say something, what will be the consequences to that?
So I'm going to wax religious, but I feel like I
Yeah.
in the New Testament, it talks about perfect love being the thing that can cast out fear,
Hmm.
right? That's the answer, our
Absolutely.
response. Talk to me about the kinds of love.
Hmm.
First, at Safehouse organizationally, how are you loving people and
Yeah.
to help cast out this fear? But then also, and this can maybe be a transition into questions
Yeah.
or things that we want to think about. First, how does Safehouse do that work, and then maybe help us think about how we can be those who can show that love to help push that fear
Yeah.
and make sure people can get what they need.
Yeah. I think one of the ways that we are working towards casting out that is working towards making sure that we understand where people are coming from. Because if we have a single narrative about specific communities, we can't show up for community. And for us at Safehouse Denver, community means acceptance, inclusion, and belonging. And so for us, it's learning about different communities and learning about how do I create safe space for this person to share their story and be who they are, because that's oftentimes something that's taken away from survivors is voice and choice. And so for us, it's, hey, we have ground beef. What would you like to make for dinner? And that simple choice for survivors often, so there are times where survivors are just like, I have never been allowed to pick what's for dinner. I've always been told what to make for dinner. Or I have never been allowed to choose the clothes that I wear. And for us to be able to provide free clothing for survivors, where it's like, hey, this is all I have because it's all donations based, but you can have a choice between these 4 items. Or even we pivoted to allow, especially children who they're oftentimes the casualty of domestic violence relationships. And just to be able to come in and pick a toy that they don't have to leave behind is life changing for kids. Because to come in and, yeah,
Just to be able to pick a toy
yeah,
that they don't have to leave behind.
yes. Yeah, to pick a toy, to, we have groups where we'll have the children, because it's scary. Like some kids are like, woo, summer camp. But there are some kids who are very aware of what happened, where they are, and they have, and for children, they don't have oftentimes the language to say, mom, dad, or grandma, or grandpa, or whoever is removing them from that situation. I don't feel safe within myself. And there are kids who take on that caretaker role at 5, where they're like, you know what, I can't even read, but I'm going to figure out how to cook dinner because mom is upset or dad is upset. Yeah.
And if I don't, no one will. And if I,
Yep.
And we've touched on this, we've come at it, but
Hmm.
I'm especially thinking about all of the people who are going to come here on Sunday, all of the folks with whom we're in community, who will say, I am not an expert on issues of domestic violence. I will
Hmm.
never be an expert
Yeah.
on these issues, but I want to be able to be useful. I want
Hmm.
to be able to be helpful.
Yeah.
And so, what would you say to them? I know there's some stuff that we'll have
Yeah.
for them, and then not to put you on the spot, but there's space for it as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, what would you say to those who want to be useful?
Yeah. I think truly knowing your gift. Maybe your gift is going out and helping us table, or maybe your gift is gardening, or maybe your gift is, hey, every year we have people who knit and they bring baby hats and baby socks to us every December because they knit all year to make sure that the babies and the children in shelter have slippers. being able to just identify those skills that people have and realizing that the smallest thing that people can provide is essential, because oftentimes survivors leave everything behind. We've had people come with literally no shoes on to the door because they ran. And that was they could literally only come with the clothes on their back. And so for us to receive donations of clothing, of food, or to have people who are willing to, I know we talked about facilities. if you have that skill of painting or repair, being able to offer those services is so helpful to us as a nonprofit. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. So oftentimes when a survivor comes in, both in the non-residential and the residential spaces, we have that conversation to say, hey, what did your relationship look like with this person? And what are some of the impacts that you know right away? Like for some people, it's like, yeah, I just get really nervous in crowds, or I get really nervous with choice. And so then advocates are saying, like, okay, well, can we have a conversation around what that looks like so that I can support you within this space? And family members can do that as well. So to say, hey, I'm really worried about your safety. When this person did this, that didn't quite sit well with me, and I'm curious, how often does that happen, or how does that make you feel? And hey, I heard about Safehouse Denver, and they have groups, and you can talk to them on the phone, and all of our services are free of charge. So there's never the barrier of, oh, I can't afford to pay for that, and we don't check IDs or things like that. So like immigration status doesn't matter either. And so we genuinely are a safe space for people to just come and be who they are, where they are in their journeys. And so for us, it's identifying, okay, how might, like you might be here on a scale of 1 to 10, you might be at a 2 as far as your comfort with choice. What's the difference between a 2 and a 3? Let's talk about how we might be able to get you from 2 to a 3. And like, nope, 3 feels too big. Let's do a 2.5. Yeah. Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yes. So, on average, people typically stay in the emergency shelter around 2.5 months. And then while they're in the emergency shelter, they're working with the advocate to talk about next steps. So we're having that conversation ongoing, and like, what does housing, or what does safe housing look like for you specifically? And so for some people, it's, I need help having a conversation with my mom so that I can go stay with her for support. And so advocates then work with them around, okay, let's role play, let's have conversations around what you might say to your parents or what you might say to a loved one to get that support. And if that support isn't available by the time that you are closing your time here, what are some other resources that we can access? So oftentimes we're looking at transitional housing. We also have an extended stay program, which isn't in the Denver area, but that's something that people can also apply for during typically around 30 days into their stay, because they're working on employment and able to maybe access public benefits where they maybe have more choice as far as what housing looks like for them. Yeah, yeah. Mhm. Yeah, we've even taken people internationally. Yeah, yeah.
My mind went in two different directions.
Yeah.
One was I have this memory of this site. It's cheesy now, but you recall like the safety pins
Hmm.
for a while, right? The way in which we try to tell someone else, I am a safe person, or at least I
Mm,
want to be, right? I'm a resource, or at least I want to be for you. Less of, hey, what is the safety pin that I can wear? But I'm mindful, you've brought really great resources to
yes.
us that are great. I'm sure your website is really helpful. I'm going to make sure to share this with some of my colleagues as
Yeah.
well. But are there other ways that we can think about, hey, this is what you can do for the people in your community to help
Hmm.
show and showcase literature, things like that.
Yeah.
Other ways that we can help be good partners in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things that's common for people who are not necessarily in the helping field, but in the helping desire,
Yes.
is like, I want to help, but I just don't know how, or I don't have the answer for that. And oftentimes, what survivors reflect back to us is, you know what, you didn't have all the answers, and that's okay, but you sat with me and you listened and you treated me like a human being. And like, if you are a helper and you can sit with someone and you may not have all the answers, but you can sit and listen and make sure that they, at the end of that conversation, feel seen and heard, then you've done your job.
I have a question from left field. And then
Yeah.
I mentioned that I fell into the category of maybe a non-traditional, not the person you would imagine
Hmm.
receiving services. I also think about my dad, who is 90 and now is receiving care. And I was talking to another friend saying, I'm worried about getting care for my parent because I don't know if
Hmm.
they're going to be safe. What about like the non-traditional, not stereotypical, right? Ways that people might need help from you, right? Or might
Totally.
need help that you can point them to.
Yeah, yeah. There are definitely times where I know we have a large deaf community and blind community within Denver. And oftentimes they're connected to agencies like Dove that provide some of those assistive services for communication, where those agencies will reach out to us directly and we can coordinate services. And so even if people have like um, peak benefits, or we've had daycare providers. And I think what is helpful oftentimes to be in community and create community for our community is to know what's available in our community.
Right.
And so taking information back to occupations and family members. And we have magnets and stickers, and putting the sticker on your water bottle just to show. And like, people may not even let you know that they're looking at the phone number or taking that down, but it's out there, and you unknowingly help someone by just having that on your water bottle.
That's really lovely. I'll pause and ask you because learn more from you. I want to zoom out.
Mm.
I think you're doing a wonderful job, and you clearly know your organization well. I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't say, hey, there's room as we go meta. There's room, but let's stick here. A challenging question people often ask to pastors: if your church were to disappear from the face of the earth tomorrow,
Hmm.
what would your neighborhood first notice? Right, in your
Mm.
absence, how would the world
Yeah.
I don't want to ask you that question because it feels too, in some ways, too bleak, right?
Hmm.
But maybe tell me about the ways that you notice the world, or that you might want us to notice the world, and let's
Yeah.
say, what are you proud of that you all are able to
Yes.
do? Not, you've
Yeah.
already shared so much, right?
Yes. I will answer your first question. So, without specialized domestic violence services, domestic violence survivors are forced into services that are not a good fit. And so oftentimes people are like, oh, like, they're homeless, they should just go to a shelter for the unhoused. That's not true, because oftentimes there's safety issues. So there might be stalking present, or concerns around the abusive person picking up the kids from school. And so to have specialized services is essential for life for domestic violence survivors. Yeah.
The rest of my questions will be the ones that I'm sure we need to do over coffee.
Yeah.
However things go together.
Yes.
But I would ask, anything else that you might want to address, or things that you would want us to take away from this?
Yeah. I think it's especially important for people of faith to know that domestic violence is real, and for members within congregations to truly manifest and live out the values that are taught in Bibles or depending on what religion you come from. But just to know that to harm someone creates harm for everyone. It doesn't just stay within your household because it impacts children. It impacts pets because oftentimes pets are used as a way of power and control. But I truly navigate life that violence is not the way that it should be. And if we could all live in harmony, that'd be fantastic. But because everyone really has that choice to choose peace and choose harmony and choose community, we know that there has to be intention within faith communities to create safety for people. Yeah.
Let me create problems we can't solve. But I'm mindful that for us, we believe in the redemption and the reconciliation of all things.
Mm-hmm.
God's putting all of this back together. And so that means both the people who have experienced brokenness by experiencing violence, by receiving violence,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that they are in need of safe places, of safety, of resources, of healing, but also recognizing that those who offer harm
Mm-hmm.
are often those who've received harm as well.
Absolutely.
They are often, maybe always, people who are in need of a healing of sorts as well.
Absolutely.
And so our goal, I think, must be, I'm overflowing with joy because of the Spirit of our goal must be, right, to create the safe places, to create a space where restoration is possible,
Mm-hmm.
and as much as we can, to create room where anyone who has experienced harm to also experience healing.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm grateful.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for the sharing.
Yeah.
Anything else before we wrap up our time?
Yeah. I think one more thing I'd like to say is in relation to those who cause harm.
Yes.
When we think about healing, and we know that within domestic violence, it's all about power and control, and it is unfortunately a choice that those people make. What I oftentimes tell people is, for a survivor, this is not the end of your story, and for the person who's causing harm, this is not the end if you choose to not let it be.
That is not the end of the story. This is not the end of the story.
Yeah.
I'm grateful that this is not the end of our story.
Yes.
I'm going to say goodbye to our friends who are joining online. And once again, Simone Williams from Safehouse Denver, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Pardon me while I run again.
Yes, I can send it to Jasper and there's lots of different versions of it.